Today, I want to do a segment comparing the constitutions that developed in Japan, Afghanistan, and Iraq following their respective wars with the United States. Now, there is a lot to say about America's failed response to the September 11th attacks, and I think Leonard Peikoff does an excellent job of it in his speech titled America versus Americans. I highly recommend checking out this speech if you have not already. But I want to start with Japan. So we all know the story of Japan if you guys had been paying attention in history class. Japan, they attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, and the United States responded by going to a war with Japan and the Pacific, culminating in attacks on mainland Japan, most notably the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But what I don't think is discussed enough is how America handled Japan after the Japanese surrender. And according to John David Lewis's book, Nothing Less Than Victory, he talks about this, how the most important mission of the occupation was the elimination of emperor worship and the religious political indoctrination. To this end, two major reforms were required. Shinto as a state cult had to be eradicated, and schools had to be purged of indoctrination for service to the state. These were the keys to remaking the moral framework that dominated Japanese political life. Shinto had been made the national religion in 1882 and was legally tied to political practice in the Meiji Constitution of 1889. Whether or not this connection between religion and state was consistent with the historical tenets of Shinto, the Japanese government employed Shinto mythology to build a national religious cult and used Shinto shrines for political purposes. American leaders in 1945 recognized the danger of Shinto as enforced by the Japanese government. A public statement by John Carter Vincent, chief of the Division of Far Eastern Affairs in the State Department, established a policy that distinguished between the private practice of Shintoism and its politicized form. In response to an inquiry by the Supreme Commander of the Allied Powers, Secretary of State James F. Burns replied via telegram, quoting Vincent, "Shintoism, insofar as it is a religion of individual Japanese, is not to be interfered with. Shintoism, however, insofar as it is directed by the Japanese government and is a measure of enforced from above by the government, is to be done away with. There will be no place for Shintoism in the schools. Shintoism as a state religion, national Shinto, that is, will go. Our policy on this goes beyond Shinto. The dissemination of Japanese militaristic and ultra-nationalistic ideology in any form will be completely suppressed." Book goes on to say that vital to the permanent lifting of the veil of evasion was the creation of a new political constitution for Japan. The story need not be repeated here. The version written by a Japanese committee was deemed wholly unacceptable to the Supreme Commander. SCAP became a voice for the Japanese people who wanted constitutional reforms as against their conservative leadership who wanted window dressing on the Meiji Constitution. In essence, the new constitution corrected the errors of 1889 when individual rights had been rejected in favor of Prussian statism. The key was to turn the emperor into a figurehead with a constitutional government. The emperor did his part on January 1946, and he issued a statement denying that he was an incarnate deity. During the following months, there was much haggling, intentional obfuscation, and twisting of verbiage when the English was translated into Japanese. But the result was American in origin. English in its basic organization and a repudiation of the Meiji authoritarianism. The Japanese Diet adopted it overwhelmingly, and in November 1946, the emperor, in his last official act, ratified it. As the new constitution went into effect on May 3rd, 1947, the Japanese band played the Stars and Stripes Forever in front of the Imperial Palace, where fanatical subjects of the emperor had once committed suicide. Not until years later did it become public knowledge that MacArthur's staff had written the Constitution, but it remains law of the land, and in that sense is a Japanese achievement. The Constitution was the climax of the occupation, for it was now impossible to regress into military rule without an open public decision. And you can actually read more about this on websites like the Center for Foreign Relations. Talks about MacArthur's role in drafting the new Japanese Constitution and how it really brought American principles and British principles into the new Constitution. This is also discussed on the History Channel's website, saying that MacArthur's Constitution at least preserved the emperor as the symbol of the state and unity of the people. So Hirohito offered his support. Many conservatives in the government were less enthusiastic, but on April 10th, 1946, the new Constitution was endorsed in popular elections that allowed Japanese women to vote for the first time. It was also talked about in an article on PBS, where they mentioned that their work resulted in a thoroughly progressive document. Although the emperor was acknowledged as the head of state, he was stripped of any real power and essentially became a constitutional monarch. A bicameral legislature with a weak upper chamber was established, and with the exception of the imperial family, all rights of peerage were abolished. 39 articles dealt with what MacArthur called basic human liberties, including not only the most American Bill of Rights, but such things as universal adult suffrage, labor's right to organize, and a host of marriage and property rights for women. Now, while Japan today is certainly not perfect, Japan certainly has flourished a lot since World War II. Japan has produced a lot of products, created a lot of wealth. A lot of products like cars, electronics, video games, and even art, anime that many people in America and throughout the world enjoy today. If you grew up in the 1980s or the 1990s, you might remember people being afraid. People in America being afraid that Japan might surpass the United States technologically and economically. What I'm trying to say is I think it's fair to say that Japan has been a story of success since World War II. At the very least, Japan did not fall apart after roughly 2 decades, and it never reverted back to a Shinto and race-based nationalism. It's still a relatively free country. And compare a country like Japan with other countries that the United States has went to war with as of late, notably Afghanistan and Iraq, both of which the United States allowed to write their own constitutions.
That's just not smart.
After the United States either toppled or chased out their political leaders. This topic was covered in a collection of essays written by people like Ilan Chernow, Onkar Ghate, and Yaron Brook. They're all featured in a book, Failing to Confront Islamic Totalitarianism.
Read a book, read a book, read a motherfucking book. Read a book, read a book, read a motherfucking book.
As you can see, this essay was written by Ilan Chernow in June of 2006, titled Washington's Failed War in Afghanistan, where at one point he mentions a new Afghan government would be a non-threat to America's interests if it were based on a secular constitution that respects individual rights. The Bush administration, however, declared that we had no right to impose our beliefs on the Afghans and instead endorsed their desire for another regime founded on Islamia. Already, this avowedly Islamic regime has jailed an Afghan magazine editor for blasphemy.
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs!
Earlier this year, Abdul Rahman, an Afghan convert to Christianity, faced a death sentence for apostasy. The new Afghan regime cannot be counted on to oppose the resurgence of Islamic totalitarianism. Ideologically, it has nothing to say in opposition to the doctrines of the Taliban. 2 members of the Taliban leadership are in the new government. It is only a matter of time before Afghanistan is once again a haven for anti-American warriors. Again, this was written in 2006. And by 2021, the Taliban had pretty much retaken all of Afghanistan. You can even see this with primary source documents, according to the website The Constitute Project, which archives a variety of constitutions throughout the world. I found the Afghanistan Constitution from 2004. You can see in its preamble, it says, actually, I got to bring it up right here. Here we go. The preamble says, "In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful, praise be to Allah, the cherisher and sustainer of worlds," blah, blah, blah. But if you go down to the first few articles, Chapter 1, State, Article 1 says, "Afghanistan shall be an Islamic republic, independent, unitary, and indivisible states." Article 2, "The sacred religion of Islam is the religion of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. Followers of other faiths shall be free within the bounds of law in the exercise and performance of their religious rituals." Article 3, "No law shall contravene the tenets and provisions of the holy religion of Islam in Afghanistan." And Ayn Rand once said that when 2 parties share the same basic fundamental premise, that the more consistent advocates of those premises will eventually win out. Considering this, is it any surprise that the Taliban easily took back Afghanistan when the Taliban was just a more consistent advocate of what the new Islamic Republic of Afghanistan was established on? But of course, we can't stop with Afghanistan. We also have to talk about Iraq. Elon Journal, writing in the fall of 2008, titled "The Wreckage, a look back at Bush's democracy crusade," referring to George W. Bush. Elon Journal talks about how it was not supposed to work this way. On the view of the Bush administration, once Iraqis were given the option, they would rush to embrace liberty. Washington thus gave Iraqis a free hand to draft a new constitution. But the Iraqis enshrined Islamic law as the government's cardinal principle. The Supreme Federal Court of Iraq can overturn a law not only if it violated the words of the Constitution, but also if it violates the established provisions of Islamiyah. This court, Agresto complains, is an imitation of the 12-member theocratic Guardians Council of the totalitarian Islamic regime in Tehran. Then in another essay that Elon Journal again wrote in January of 2005, titled "Bush's Betrayal of America, the Iraqi Elections," Elon Journal talks about how perhaps the most alarming outcome for the United States security would be a popularly elected theocracy aligned with or highly sympathetic to Iran's totalitarian regime. Iran is reported to have smuggled nearly 1 million people into Iraq to vote and has donated millions of dollars to sway the election in favor of the Shiite-led government. Already, Iranian intelligence officials are said to roam the hallways of Iraqi party offices, on whose walls hang pictures of Iran's supreme leader. That a theocracy may rise to power in Iraq appears to be totally compatible with the president's conception of freedom. As he told Fox News in October, if Iraq votes in a fundamentalist government, he would be disappointed, but democracy is democracy. If that's what the people choose, that's what the people choose. And going back to the Constitute Project, this is the Iraqi Constitution from 2005. where we can see in the first few articles where it says in Article 2, first, Islam is the official religion of the state and is a foundation source of legislation. No law may be enacted that contradicts the established provisions of Islamiyah. And who knows how much longer this current Iraqi government will last before it's taken over by radicals, either through democratic vote or by force, similar to what the Taliban did in 2021. And I'm no foreign policy expert or military expert, so I'm not even sure if it's the responsibility of the victors of a war to help the defeated establish a new country. But if America is going to get in the business of replacing hostile regimes with new governments, maybe the U.S. should do what Douglas MacArthur did in Japan and pressure Japan's leaders into modeling their new constitution after the United States and Britain, rather than the Bush strategy of allowing the defeated countries to draft their own constitutions, which has clearly been a big, fat mistake.